locality. And there were two artists who were part of it, which was me and Zinelli Momole. Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah. And some very beautiful things happened, and I think that trip really left its mark. I then went to Durban as well, and some of the things will come out because I'm very curious, of course. Uh, One of the very important things was that I went to the District 6 Museum, which was then headed by Same Lizzie, and I wasn't aware of what District 6 meant. So that was quite. So if you start with this project and give people a background.
I will. First, I'd just like to thank you all very much for coming this evening. It's wonderful to see such a large group of people from Delhi, a city which I'm already beginning to love. And I'd like to thank particularly Shikari and Anahita and Anushka for bringing me here, and to the students who took part in the workshop this week. But to talk about District 6, District 6 is an area of Cape Town. It's very close to the centre of the city, and it's between the mountains and the sea. And it was a very vibrant area, very mixed race area, and in the 1960s, the apartheid government decided that this little beautiful spot of Cape Town was much too nice to belong to anybody but whites. So they announced that it was going to be demolished over a period of years and the families would be moved out. And for a long time, nobody thought this would happen. They thought that nothing was happening, and it was quite a shock when about 4 years later the first families were moved out. And I was part of an organisation called Friends of District 6, in which we tried to raise consciousness in Cape Town to do something about these threatened demolitions. And one of the people that I knew rather well through this organisation and other sources was a woman called Naz O'Brien. She had lived in the same house for 30 years, and she was actually from a very famous political family, a very powerful woman, and she was one of the last families in District 6. And in 1981, on the day of Eid, somebody from the Bantu administration board knocked on her door and handed her an eviction notice for 30 days, to be out in 30 days. Naz just took a Koki, she slammed the door in this man's face, and she wrote on the wall in her hall, "Welcome to the last supper." And somebody else came in and he took a Koki and he wrote outside, "The truth is on the walls of this house, the truth that is denied." And then everybody who came just added their name, or a message, or a poem, or something. There were sort of very happy memories, and there were sad things that had happened. And the walls became a document. And the BBC came, they made a little film about it, and everybody who came to Cape Town went to this house, which was a very strong, beautiful suburban house. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. And I think that, in a sense, was an important lesson to me in the way that text on walls and text generally can convey a message. You put it somewhere, it stays there. If you say something, you heard, but if you've got it written somewhere, it kind of stays in the mind. And of course, during the apartheid years, also graffiti was a very important element of public discourse. Students would write things at night, the police would come and whitewash them out, and then they'd write again the next night. And you'd have these dialogues which were conscientizing people against the state. So yes, District 6 was very important. And the piece that you were talking about, Momentous of District 6, was a piece in which I made in 1993, which was now 12 years after District 6 was demolished, and the thing was, by the time District 6 was finally demolished, we had achieved our aim in one way, in that it had become an area of disgrace and of shame. Nobody wanted to build there anymore because it was too shameful. There was such a kind of heavy cloud which hung over that area. It still looks like that. It's amazing. All this time later, it still hasn't been resolved. But at that time, it looked now like a bomb site, of grass had grown over the ruins. But if you dug a little bit, you could just find all these little residues of people's lives. A child's exercise book, a toy, a little piece of scarf, all these things. So I gathered all these little scraps one review called me Cape Town's very own bag lady, which wasn't very complimentary. And I thought of them as you might think of a collection of Roman glass or the little residues of a civilization which is gone. And I cast them in little bricks, little clear resin bricks, and made a structure in steel like a house. And it was something like between a house and a chapel. And I had made a tape in 1981 of people talking, and that played the whole time. And I surrounded the house with soil from District 6, and I put an incense stick inside. So as you could go inside, you could look at all these little scraps. You had the aroma of District 6, you had these voices in your ear. And actually, if you're in Birmingham, Alabama, in the United States, you can see it now because it's on exhibition there, on a show called Third Spaces. But it went to the Venice Biennale, and
In 2013.
no, that was 1993, yeah. So a long time ago, yeah. 20 years before that. So that was District 6, but it was that idea of voices, of getting voices out. And
So I think the audience might like to know, would you say that was a marked shift in your practice of starting to use voices and then text and narrative, or were you, I know that you, I think most people wouldn't know, Sue started as a journalist, so that's her background. Was that when you consciously started using text in your work, or?
I think it was when I consciously started using, I was doing installation, I made a series of portraits of women, but the idea of these actual words, I think, was a step forward for me at that time.
And that has continued.
And that has continued.
Okay. So when I went in 2004, it was exactly 10 years after the apartheid. I don't know if it's right to use the word. There was a little bit of a sense of the celebration, celebratory in the air in some ways.
Sure.
Of course, the University of Western Cape is very different, is very left-leaning, and we were all put up in the center. And every day when we drove to the conference, people were so incredibly generous with information, with telling us everything. But that little 20-minute drive, you would see the beautiful Table Mountain, and you would be aware of the beauty. But it was so difficult for me to be able to appreciate the beauty, because there was this thing of segregation, which just seethed under the surface. Even the fact that where we were from the center and moving to this slightly rough area where University of Western Cape is, you could see the shifts. You could see the shifts in who lived where. And finally, also, most of the people who were talking to us as in people who come to the conference, were South Africans of Indian origin or white South Africans. There weren't many black South Africans. And it almost sounds very tricky to say that, but there has been this very troublesome question which comes up again and again. Some years ago, I was at a place called the Rights Academy. There was this wonderful artist called Turios, who was a black South African. And I remember Kurtzi won the Nobel Prize, or there was a conversation about it, and she was sounding very cynical. She said, my mother's a writer too. And I'm not sure what measures of recognition and when will it come to black South Africans. I don't mean to put you in the spot, and I'm sure the reason I'm saying this, because I know that you will not feel like you're being put on a spot to comment on this.
I think that transformation in South Africa has not happened at the rate that it should have happened. It's very disappointing to those of us who really look forward to a radical shift in 1994 when the new government came into place. I think we were all hoping that things would move along quite quickly and things would be more equalized. But of course, it's not that easy to overcome years of apartheid, years of colonial thinking. And the other thing is, very often, it's sad to say, the parties who are brilliant liberators are not quite as brilliant when they sort of settle down to the bureaucratic business of government and getting programs into place and carried out. So that the education system, particularly, which I think is really the most basic thing that should have changed, hasn't really changed fast enough, and we we've seen this in the last 2 years when the students have really rebelled and are saying enough is enough, we're sick of this. Your curriculums are too Western, you're not paying enough attention to African philosophy, African art, African culture. We're still hearing far too much about Europe, about Western writers. When are we going to get the recognition? When are we going to get more black lecturers in the universities? So there is a stream of protests all the time, and the universities are in quite a bad state, actually.
Did it feel like a bit of a double bind? And I'm asking this in a many-pronged way. So this kind of governance coming to practice as an artist, especially practice which is so far removed from where the market is, wherever that is. How does it impact, and how are you able to do projects, or how have you been able to do, realize projects? And in certain situations, because you speak so vociferously about the marginalized, it sounds like a cliche, but also women's voices. With you being white South African, has this been more of an issue? So there are two different questions. One is this, and the other is, in this kind of governance, how has it been possible as an artist to carry on with the practice? Of course, now, as we know from India, people are more savvy, and there are these alternate spaces. But I think in the 90s and 80s must have been quite a bit of a struggle. Do you want to share a bit of that?
Yes. Well, I mean, the government has never really supported the arts in South Africa. They don't.
Like you.
What they did do, when the new government came into place, they were much more likely to support PRAF projects. They were interested in which I think is correct, actually. They were interested in projects which supported people's employment, that people could actually learn. So they would send large groups of bead workers to Washington, or basket makers, or performance artists. But visual artists actually got a pretty bad deal. So we never got that support from the government before or after. So that didn't make much difference. But to get to the second part of your question about being a white South African, yes, of course, it's always difficult. You have to kind of constantly negotiate your position.
But what becomes larger, solidarity as women?
I think so. Well, yes, because I mean, I belong to women's organisations, so I think I did work through that particular thing a long time ago. Although I have still found, to get back to district, since that review that I talked about, the district, the review, that particular review where I was referred to as Cape Town's very own bag lady, the reviewer said he was sick of whites, bleeding heart whites, making work about other people's unhappiness. And my response to that was, well, I certainly hope that everybody in District 6 would come forward and tell their own story, but personally, as an artist, I felt I had to make work about things which concerned me, and I considered it a form of cultural apartheid to tell people that they could only make work about their own race group, which is an attitude which I still hold, because I don't think it's what you make work about, it's the way in which you make work, which is important. Of course, there can be very offensive work made, but that's something that you have to negotiate with yourself as an artist.
I'll move to something different. Since you use text in a very important way in your work, you want to take us through a little bit of how, okay, I'll let you speak and then I'll ask a few questions that were formulated in the last talk, but it would make sense to ask them first.
All right, well, I think I would like to talk a little bit about the work that's on this particular exhibition, which is a series called Other Voices, Other Cities, in which the new work that is on the wall, which was literally shot on Saturday, so it's quite remarkable that it's actually managed to get process printed and up on the wall in a very few days. It's part of a series called Other Voices, Other Cities, which started when I was invited to the Havana Biennale in 2009. And I took that District 6 work that I'm talking about, or the photographs that I took of the District 6 houses with the text. I took a series about what I'd done in Alexandria. And I wanted to do a text work in Havana. And I was going to interview people and put up text not without reason, because what they could be, government is extremely prescriptive, passports could be taken away, that kind of thing. And so I was talking to a Cuban artist one night, and he said, well, the problem is we've all got a blockade in our minds. And because the Cuban government constantly blamed anything that went wrong was the American blockade. So it seemed to me that that was a very potent statement. The blockade is also in our minds. So I then proposed to the Biennale people that I did that statement in English and in Spanish, put it up on a derelict hotel in very simple lettering, which would be removed at the end of the Biennale as a public art statement. And they said yes. Until the day came when we were supposed to put it up, and then they said, no, sorry, we didn't get permission from the local authorities. You can't do it. So in the end, what I did was I argued about it, and they said, no, we can't do it. And then the Minister of Culture said, he came to my opening, asked me what it was all about. I told him, he said, we will do it. All the television cameras were watching. And then the next day he said, oh no, by the way, we can't do it. I've sent a letter to that effect. But then I was told, the minister says you can do it in his office. So I said, it's extremely gracious of the minister, but the answer is no, thank you. That's not a public place, this is a public art piece. So they then said, well, we have another building for you, it's on the other side of Havana. And we drove and drove and drove, and came to this, booms went up, went to this fairly derelict building, and I said, but what is this place? And they said, oh, we make educational films here. So then I knew that no one would ever see the work, but we put it was late, put the text up in the building, took the photographs. Behind the building was a banana plantation and the wreck of an old car, and I just had people standing there holding the letters. But it occurred to me, and I liked it, I liked the look of it, it looked like a kind of a protest line. And it occurred to me that it would be interesting to go to cities and try to divine the essence of that city. But in future that I would do it in a different way. I'd run a workshop, I'd get people from the city to tell me, why do you live here? What is the essence of the city? And we'd write it down, and then the group would vote. So it would be a group voice. And you can see that the result of those various groups in the works up on the wall. And the Havana one was the only one in which only one person spoke. All the rest are the result of this process of inviting people to share what it is, what they hate, what they love, what irritates them, what draws them back, and so on. So, yeah. What really fascinates me is the life. I don't mind sitting in the taxis because of this endless parade of life which goes past me in every shape and form. I can't believe what I'm seeing very often. I saw two young girls there about as they're weaving through the traffic, and I'm just horrified by the fact that, just a little bump and they could both be thrown off their bikes. But all kinds of things, kind of produce. Going home last night actually from hanging this work, which it's now midnight almost, and we're surrounded by these huge trucks, and Shafali explained to me that the trucks are kept out of the city between 5 and 9, but after that, it's just this mad race. So there's this craziness of people moving backwards and forwards at high speed all the time. But at the same time, I find it so interesting, all the different layers of humanity, of cultures, of diversity, of culture, yeah. And that's what I really enjoy. And people are very incredibly open and friendly.
I felt Durban was a little bit more like Delhi, but Cape Town was very good. That's where you live.
Yes, Cape Town.
It's just wherever you look. It's amazing. Beautiful. I want you to talk about your work. It's a pleasure to meet you. And I picked up this work partly because we saw it just recently. It also then evoked a lot of questions about, one thing is using text and in a more formalized way. I don't know if I can use the word relational aesthetic, actually not. In fact, what I would like to talk about is this idea also, as a separate thing, is this idea of witness, which I've been thinking about, and I was quite happy to see that you had been working on it. Witness with an H in inverted commas, so it's actually So they're not used as dummies for a work.
Yes, I think this whole thing of witness is very key to my work. It's something that was very much in the air in the 70s and the 80s in South Africa, that no matter how impotent you might feel yourself in the face of a government as militarily strong as the apartheid government, you could bear witness. This idea of bearing witness, of reporting it, of bringing it out, that is such a key thing to the way that the various organizations operated. And I think that I still have that feeling that I must tell the story. And this piece, it's a pleasure to meet you. It's 10 years now since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I began to wonder, what is the long-term effect of that? I don't know if you know what it was with the coming of the democratic government. It was an opportunity for people who'd undergone terrible things in their families to come in front of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and ask, what happened to my husband? How was he killed? Who killed him? What happened to the body? So it was an uncovering of all these terrible things. And I wondered, now 10 years afterwards, how has telling those stories, has it helped people? Has it brought closure? And so, what's happened to the children of those people who appeared in front of the TRC? So this work is one in a series which is attempting to look at that. Two young people whose fathers were shot by the apartheid police when they were very young. Candice was 18 months, and I think Sia was about 2.5 or 3. And how have they grown up with it? What did it mean to them? And how are they dealing with it now? And if you watch it, there are very different responses. One, Candice is forgiven, Sia definitely has not. And they each tell their stories, and then Sia starts to challenge her. And they land up at the end, in which they say, well, the only thing we've got in this country is we have to learn to respect each other. So I think it's a very interesting piece in which many points of view are aired. And it's actually already had a big effect. It's been shown in various situations in South African universities, and people have really responded to it in terms of feeling that they'd love to tell their own stories about the trauma in their own families. Because very often family trauma is buried. The parents don't want to talk about it. They want their kids not to have to worry about it. And it's really important to begin to talk about it.
As a video artist, I also know what a challenge it is to how to tell and how to not tell. And I think the formal arrangement or the way things come together then also add layers of something which I like Kavita's comment very much, the way she the way she read into the work. But I would not say that that was gearing towards making fiction, but perhaps narrative. So that would be the your narrative. So another layer of something added, which would be the way you want to tell the story. Do you want to talk a little bit about narrative in that respect? If you agree with me.
Well, I think, yes, I'm always interested in what happened and how did you react to it. So those are always the questions that I'm asking.
And of course, there can be many narratives.
And there can be many. And I mean, this was from about a 2.5-hour interview, which has been trimmed to 25 minutes. So there was a lot that I left out, which could easily have gone in. But I just try to keep the essence of the story, the things that seem most important to me.
It's very essential,
Yeah.
which is what makes it so powerful as well. Thank you.
Well, it's, the thing is that I think it's wherever you are in the world. I've always kind of had the idea that in America it's easy to galleries. It's not true. Artists everywhere struggle. They do. There are very few artists who are right at the top and can really make a living.
Maybe if you give a couple of concrete examples of works and how they were.
Sure. I mean, well, a project like this, for instance, was a sponsorship through the Prameya Art Foundation. So they were kind enough to organize everything and get the group together, the photography, everything else. And so that is how that happens. Sometimes I get funding. I mean, It's a Pleasure to Meet You is actually funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation through somebody else. It's a study looking at the long-term effects of apartheid poverty and violence. It has a section for the humanities, so I was invited to be a visual artist on it. You have to do other things, but if you're a young artist, you have to be